So I think with that, what we're going to do next is call up Deputy Minister from EMR, Lauren Haney, and Laura Lee Johnson, VP HECLA, and current President of YCM for less than 24 hours. And we're going to have some discussions entitled Past Experiences, Future Decisions. So if you ladies would join me up here, that'd be great. No, I'm going to sit here. And can you start the clock too? Yeah. On the mic? Okay. Okay, so thank you, ladies, for being here. And I think what we wanted to do was just sort of, I mean, you guys probably know a lot more than what was in that presentation, but just was wondering about if you could give your perspectives about the evolution of the industry and mineral development. And I think, Laura Lee, we were going to start with you first.
Yes, I believe I drew the short straw on this one. You know, I really can't speak to, and the reason we want Sue to be integrated into this is because as a mentor and someone who's been in the industry longer than I have, or either of us has, you'll see a three-way conversation happening. Sue can kick me when I'm wrong and fill in some of the blanks. I really only entered into the mining world in a formal way on the mining side in like late 90s. So prior to that, I was in Fish and Wildlife, so I saw a different perspective. And from what I watched, and I was in the early stages of the federal, or the late stages of the federal agencies having responsibility here. So I was at the Mining Recorder's Office in Mayo. And then we devolved into the Yukon process. And then I joined YESIP in 2003. And then, so I've seen it from many different perspectives, but what I do see, and I think today is a real credit to what we do see, is, and I'll go back to a couple of folks, Cassie Boggs, who spoke yesterday about the history of mining, and she's got a lot more experience than I do, and across the world. The evolution has been, it's been a very industrialized activity that plowed forward, didn't have a lot of rules, didn't have a lot of protection in place. Companies, and I've said it a couple of times, what I see in the mining industry is they're quick to evolve and they're pivoting and moving. And there were early relationships built with First Nations long before it was considered a requirement. It was happening prior to land claims, but a lot through that process where it became very evident that that was where people needed to go. I know it should have happened sooner. I respect all of that, but that's part of the evolution we saw. Companies respected it, and often many were in advance of the requirements. And we see, some pretty sophisticated agreements now, moving forward to, a lot of First Nation partnerships, then business opportunities. We're at a point now where employment used to be a really big deal, and we've heard from nations that it's less the thing. And in the Yukon, we have a very low unemployment rate, so not surprising that that's not where their focus is anymore. But agreements started out really with a basis of respect for environment, respect for business opportunities, employment, and then commitments and revenue share. And we see that has evolved, I believe, over time to today. We have, potential for First Nations owning mines, and we now have First Nations royalty companies becoming a thing. Like, we're really catapulting, and we see, businesses. We talked this morning a little bit about companies that have spent upwards of a couple of decades stumbling along, building different opportunities with First Nation companies and First Nation businesses. And, we're evolving quickly, and we're stumbling along the way. But from my perspective, I've seen a real shift in in the way, and I'm grateful I came in when I did, because, you know, I came in, it's like, this is a great idea, we're gonna do this, land claims was happening, it was all, I didn't really have a lot of the history. I've definitely heard about a lot of the history, seen a lot of the history, but I'm excited about the direction things are going, and this, and, you know, we're not here to speak a lot about it, but we're even going into legislation that's supposed to be twinned with final agreements. So that's a very high level, but we don't have a lot of time here. So that's some of the things I see happening, and I'm proud to be working in and being part of it.
We could probably go on and on for hours about this. Laura and I have known each other a long time. In terms of evolution, I think about the big drivers, and I think for me, the biggest single influence on the evolution of the industry has been the evolution of First Nations rights and that landscape that's happened. And we see that play out in what we call the G to G, the government to government relationship, where there's more consideration of rights and interests in resource management. And then, as you speak of, as essentially an industry partner, where 10 to 15 years ago, IBAs looked very different than they do today. And today, we see exactly as you talk about, First Nations are industry players, essentially. We're looking at equity stake, we're looking at a lot higher expectations of involvement in decision-making and planning of projects. I would say I'd be remiss not to talk about, you know, whether it's a trend or a driver. In our jurisdiction, we do see increasing information requirements. We've seen a trend of that. We see there's overlap in our systems, in our three regimes, the assessment and water licensing and the quartz mining licensing system. So we're aware of that. We are working on it. Our Director of Mineral Resources, Kelly Constable, is here and doing some great work on that front. And we're trying to not make it a glitzy initiative. We're trying to do kind of on the ground work with YESUB. Back there's Kent, he'll talk next. And with the Water Board, Secretariat, and the board as well. With really principles of communication, understanding what each other does, trying to take down some of those barriers. So we heard from Kelly when we've had many industry meetings in the past few days, and she's talked a bit about it. So I won't go on too much about that. I think, you know, like any evolutionary pathway, there's a big event. And often it's a catastrophic event, and in this case, it's the Eagle Gold failure. And so that has shifted the trajectory of the evolution of the industry. You know, is mining and exploration done in our territory? Absolutely not. But will it change as a result of this? Yes, it certainly will. You know, the kind of three main parties in this, with industry, with the territorial government, with First Nations governments, I mean, we're all in this together, whether we like it or not, and we do have to find a way to be together and move this forward. I think acknowledging what's happened, I want to take a moment to talk about the Independent Review Board that's been established to look into the causes of the failure. That's going to be a critical piece in understanding how we move forward. There is a pathway forward. Every one of the causes, it's not going to be one, it's going to be a few. Every one of the causes has a story behind it. You know, my direction has been leave no stone unturned. Get into what happened, why it happened, where the gaps are, and including looking at our own regulatory system and strengthening that, again, to ultimately be able to move forward. I think those are the three key pieces for me in terms of drivers.
Well, and if I would just say that if you look at the makeup of the room and you would have come to a geoscience 10 years ago, you would notice a shift.
Yep.
Everybody's in the room. And this has started to shift about, well, post-COVID, we've seen a real shift, and it's a welcome shift, and love seeing the diversity in the room. Obviously, there's a lot more interest right now, and when there's been a harsh event, there's a lot of interest. I'm happy to see everyone in the room, and that is an evolution too. We need to be in the room having these conversations.
Yeah, you've said that this week. I've heard it a lot this week. It's, yeah, like being willing to have these difficult conversations and talk about the elephant in the room. We can move forward, and I do not mean move on. I would never minimize what the failure is or has been. I've been living and breathing it since June 24th. I fully understand the risks and the stakes, and I also see the opportunity to move forward and to make this, we'll continue to make this a great jurisdiction for responsible mining. I don't remember who said it, maybe it was Jonas in his speech, but talked about the importance of mining and responsible mining right here in our territory versus seeing that done in other places with less rigorous requirements. But we do have work to do, and I think we're willing. I think everybody wishes that the failure hadn't happened, and I think everybody is willing to pull up their sleeves and do the work to figure out how to move forward together.
Great, thanks for those comments. I found when I was putting the presentation together, because like I say, I've been doing stuff in the Yukon for way too long, over 30 years, and just seeing, like say, I guess I didn't appreciate the evolution of even the regulatory side. The agreement we had with Toronto Quechin was really interesting, because when we met the federal minister and we were trying to get our water license, and he's like, I can't really say this, there's nothing written down, but you should be talking to the First Nations. We're like, we already are. We're way down the road. And he was just like, oh. I said, well, and luckily I worked for people that saw that as a value. That was my job, was to be in town and talk to people and talk to the nations. So yeah, for me it was just a real eye-opener to see how stuff has evolved, and it's going to keep evolving. With that, I think I'll maybe just go on to the second question. In realizing that we need to evolve, and there's talk about new regimes. So maybe asking you what you think are the most important aspects in developing a new regime with respect to our industry. And I think, Lauren, you're going to touch on that first.
Okay, sure. I would say, if I was sort of to say the single most important, clarity is what comes to my mind. So clarity of information required, clarity of process, clarity about how folks are involved in decision making, clarity about who is accountable for what. I think certainly the underpinning and what has sparked the development of new mineral legislation beyond what was thought of during devolution, more recently when this re-sparked, was ensuring that we have a regime that better reflects the interests of First Nations and does provide clarity about how affected First Nations are involved in the planning and development and execution of projects. That is a critical piece. I want to say that fundamentally, this is legislation for regulating the mineral industry, which implies there must be a robust mineral industry to regulate. So that is one of the founding principles, as the negotiation tables are forging ahead with developing the new mineral legislation. It is to ensure that a robust and viable industry is maintained while still achieving the other goals that we've heard about this week and we know are important, as I said, reflecting First Nations interests better, of course, environmental stewardship and protection, and a robust and accountable regulatory system.
I guess from the perspective of the industry, I couldn't argue with any of those things. They're all very valid. And I would say up until this week, when we've had a lot more conversation about the level of detail that was going on in the GDG meetings, there was a lot of fear and concern, quite frankly. And I don't think it's unwarranted. It's just typical of not knowing for a period of time. Grateful that there's a framework being set out, that the commitments that are way overdue and being met are being considered. I don't think there's anybody in industry that doesn't think that that's necessary. I know people are afraid. It's change, but our industry has embraced and suggested and supported this move. I would say, though, that when the framework gets to its space, there is some concern that there won't be enough connectivity to the industry to support discussing where things may or may not be achievable. Early on assessment days, we sat in the assessment desks together. So we know that with really good intentions and good meaning, sometimes terms and conditions that were recommended were unachievable. And having the opportunity to have the dialogue, not the decision, but be part of the conversation so that this is made in a robust way that actually supports the intention. I think that is a piece that we would really want to ensure, and we've asked for. The chamber continues to ask, and others do. I think it was a bit of a relief this week to have some conversation around what is happening. Even though it's not the details, it's the intention, and we think it's good. And but just reiterating, or my industry would not be happy with me, that it's really important that we get to be, again, the collaboration pieces where things work. So we hope to be there at the table, supporting and having the conversation about how that might impact.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely fair comment. And when I talk about, one of the principles of developing new mineral legislation is to make sure it ensures or allows for a viable, robust industry. Well, we've got to do that check. So that is happening, and I will fully acknowledge it's been a while and maybe too long since there has been a check-in. But things are to the point where we can go back to the industry table and do a check-in.
Yeah, it was really great to learn that that is the intention. And to be fair, we planned this talk and then we had a meeting with the minister, so, pivot.
Yeah, I think that's been, again, for those of us who've been around a long time, quite often where, the discussions were a lot of times between industry and YG, the government, know that there's these government to government going on. And I think just as an industry, we have a lot of experience and we have a lot of knowledge. And so those checks of, as you say, sometimes you put something in writing, I'm going to try this, it's going to be the best intention, but is it actually practical? So, and I know there's been other parts with EMR, we've been working on other things and just walking through some scenarios on that. And that's something as an industry and the chamber, we still would like to definitely be there and do that. Because I think then, as you say, we want to develop something that works for everyone, but also has to, make sure that can do that. I remember years ago when mining land use came in, and there was the forms for, the class 1, 2, 3, 4, and the forms weren't working. And so I just went to government and said, hey, how about we change the forms? And it just was some basic stuff, and nothing wrong with that, but it was just having people from industry be able to say, these are the questions that might be more useful for you to ask, or the way this is set up, we can't actually answer that. So I think industry has a lot to contribute and definitely wants to be at the table as much as we can. And yeah, can just provide some of those insights. I think we've all been there when you're trying to develop something new, whether it's a new legislation, new process, great ideas, and then they don't necessarily always pan out
Well, and
exactly how you planned.
Yeah, and we're all trying to catch up, right? Like in my limited experience, the tripartite working groups are the very best, and hopefully we'll see more of that evolve out of this process. Again, we talked earlier about just availability. There's so many things going on, and there's so many pulls and requirements for all the different governments to get sorted. So easy to get stuck in that laser focus. And again, just wanting to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm glad that opportunity is coming, and I would say what's maybe different about this with some of those other tripartite arrangements is again, that evolution of the landscape of First Nations rights and interests, there was a real need for government to government reset, and two, really understanding and offering First Nations the chance to articulate what their interests are now. There was a lot of guessing by Yukon government prior to, this is what we think your interests are, and this process has allowed for much more of a collaborative opportunity. And I'll say too, when we engage, from this conversation, I want to go back and make sure the material that we're engaging with is very clear about the objectives, not just kind of what has landed, what the outcomes have been, so that, if industry has other ideas, you can fully understand what the objectives are that we're trying to achieve, what the interests are that we're trying to address. And then so your response, your feedback can come with that lens. This is maybe a different way you can achieve that same objective.
I think when we set objectives together, it's much easier to get to the common end. And I think that is the one piece that often happens when there's two parties that meet, is they're so familiar with the way it evolved. And the party that wasn't part of that gets the outcome and they're like, what the? But they don't understand the intention, right? And that's how we can truly feed into meaningful contributions, is with the objective in mind. Like many companies put 3 or 4 priorities, and if you go back to making decisions and they all align with that, then you're always close to the right answer.
And I think it was interesting this morning, some comments that the Grand Chief made. And I remember he was talking about, I think for industry working with the nations as well, there was a point, and I know I was at that table, where we were just trying to have the leadership of the nations meet with the chamber. There's some really good conversations happening. And so, yeah, if there's any way that's something we need to work on as an industry, again, because I think there's opportunity. He said there's, people just want to learn. And Tosh pointed out too, that you have younger generation who are like, we don't need mining. What do we need mining for? They just don't see a lot of she said, you need the good news stories. And so we need to find those.
Good news. We've got 3 of them set up already because of this week, so.
Okay, I think just maybe we're getting down to the end here, so I'm just wondering if you guys have any other final comments or items you'd like to share on the topic?
I'm interested, and I know I've mentioned this to the chamber, I'm interested in talking with industry about communication and education of the mineral sector to the public. So I think it's fair to say, and we all feel it, that the perception of mining is lower in the Yukon right now than it's been in the past. And I would say it was lower before Eagle Gold happened. So this isn't just Eagle Gold. And what I hear, and I mean, I'm from here, I live here, raising my kids here, my husband's here. And what you feel is a real disconnect. Like we have a lot of new people in the territory, which is great, but there really is a disconnect between mining and an understanding of the public of why mining is good or even not good, but just a lack of awareness and understanding. So I would like to have conversations about what do we do? And I don't know what government's role is, but just in general, I think informing people and knowing more about mining and its contributions, its risks is important.
Well, now I feel a little guilty because I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. Jonas, if I may. Jonas was one of my largest critics and the chamber's largest of critics for the last 3 years. Lo and behold, he had the courage to apply and come work with us. And he has said on multiple occasions, yeah, man, they've actually done a lot. And as one of their largest critics, I see the work that's been done. We didn't do it. We did it in a vacuum. To be fair, we had to get it took 2 years to get the chamber to a place where we had representation from all the different companies. We'd kind of wandered off into 4 different sort of groups, trying to advocate for different things, collaborating, bringing that back together. We completed a 5-year strategic plan. Well, we did the exercise in December of last year. few complications with staffing, but we got it completed and written a month and a half ago. In the interim of doing the work and completing it, we'd advanced probably 60% of the preparation. And super excited to say one of Jonas's first jobs post geoscience is to start the communications plan. So number one was a strong communications plan. And in that, it was to be, to own the history of mining, so that we could then freely talk comfortably about the future of mining. As an industry, we've been kind of mostly, not everyone, but by and large, we're kind of like, we try to do good things and be under the radar, and we haven't owned our wins. Now that really hurts in a time where we have a big impact that's negative. It hurts even worse. And it's hard now, and we've waited, honestly, because it's not the right time to launch your good news post a disaster. But we are going to start reaching out and talking about education. And to that point, I had asked Sue to do the work she was doing just in compiling, because there was a lot of mines are closing, it's all bad. And it was like, what are the connectors? Why can industry be successful not in the Yukon? So can we just go back and have a look at all the mines that have operated and get some of the facts around what happened, the good, the bad, all of it. Maybe there's some patterns, maybe there's some things we can learn, maybe there's some takeaways. And so that's what started the review of that. There's some bad history, we have to own it. We can't move forward, to your point, without owning some of the bad history. But we really do, as an industry, want to be engaged in finding solutions, being better, doing better, and being okay with owning some of the upside.
And I think a key part, I was going to talk about that after the next panel, is with Geoscience this year, I'm not sure if everyone in the room knows, at 3 o'clock, the conference is going to be open to the public. We've been advertising a lot. We're hoping we will see some public. So we ask as members of industry, if you see people wandering around that don't have a badge on, please engage. We have some talks set up for them. They're just going to be short, high-level educational talks. And then Keith Halliday is going to be speaking at 5 as a keynote. So, I mean, he's a Yukoner, not connected to our industry, but he has some very interesting perspectives on, what the industry means to the Yukon. So looking forward to that. So yeah, we just encourage, if you see someone walking around, doesn't have a tag on, just say, well, hey, are you looking for something? Or introduce yourself. Say, hey, this is my part in this industry. Because we're trying to, this is an experiment. We're hoping that we'll see some people come through the door. But yeah, it's just, what can we do to get the story out there? Because in the past, the Geoscience Forum used to be open when we had it in the old venue. That was the opportunity to do that. Everybody had their booths up, and Saturday it was basically open to everyone. We had a few kids' activities. We had a very successful family day up at Canada Game Centre. I've heard upwards of maybe 700 kids through that. So we encourage anybody in industry to be part of that. I've heard some people already say, I want to be there next year. So yeah, I think just maybe thinking as an industry, what more can we do even individually? There's that bigger plan that we're trying to put together. But yeah, I think we all need to figure out what that plan looks like and always just keep talking about, be proud about, hey, I'm part of this industry and this is what we do.
And part of the strategic plan is the outreach to all governments, looking for input and trying to be part of the vehicle for sharing information. Once upon a time, the Chamber not so long ago tackled First Nation engagement. That landscape is so drastically changed, and it's becoming individualized, and different nations have different expectations, and that's great. Industry may be less involved in some places, and they may not have had a lot of thought about it. So we really want to be open to that vehicle that allows all of that information to flow. And I do have like 24 hours left as a president, so I'll make sure that this happens. It's my parting gift.
So I think we're just down to the last minute or two. Any final comments? Appreciate you being up here to talk about the tough topics.
I would say, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I think it was great to see your presentation, Sue, just to do the overview. And again, it's the pluses and the minuses, but it's the reality that we're in. I also think there's an incredible opportunity in the reclamation industry in this territory as well. It's a bit of a side note, but something that I've seen happen in the past, well, I guess almost 20 years, is like back in the day, there was very, very open conversations with industry, with regulators, with assessors, with First Nations. And what I've seen, I mean, particularly with, I say particularly, we have our interagency issues to work with. Yes, a water board, us. But I've seen this evolution over the past, especially 10 years, hey, 5 or 10 years, where it's like people aren't picking up the phone anymore and calling each other. And we do have, I mean, our system is very paper-based, but I think people need to not be afraid to just pick up the phone and call. If you get something wonky from a regulator, from an assessor, I'll just talk on your behalf, Tim and Ken, you're welcome. Please just pick up the phone and ask the question, build a relationship. I think some of those really fundamental principles are really important and are actually the key to moving forward together.
I would echo that. I think the communication piece, and so full disclosure, Lauren and I started in YESAB shortly after just before the legislation and just after the legislation. So we were in the very beginnings of what's now a more developed process. But at that time, you had to pick up the phone. Yeah. We didn't have the policies. We didn't have the, and we had to work with each other. And we had sort of an intention, and everybody honored it. And it wasn't, transparency wasn't throwing everything on the internet. It was actually understanding the question and fully engaging. So I don't know how COVID, which made us afraid of phones, but nonetheless, it is time that, it's great to have the communication. I mean, those are always caught in notes. It's not like they're sidebar conversations. When we were at YESAB, there was a lot of note to file, had this conversation with this person. So it's not like you're not being transparent. It's just greater clarity and actual dialogue.
Well, I think our time is up, so thank you very much. We could have a round of applause.
Thank you.
Panelists.